The Battle of Lincoln. Billy the Kid's 4-Day Street War. The Battle of Lincoln. Billy the Kid's 4-Day Street War. If you're enjoying this story, give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more Wild West tales. A twisted history tale of bullets, betrayal, and bad luck in the New Mexico Territory. You could smell the smoke of revenge long before the first shot was fired in the summer of 1878. Lincoln, New Mexico Territory. A long, dusty street with a handful of adobe buildings and a whole lot of tension. By July, everyone in town had picked a side, and whichever side you weren't on, you'd better keep your head down or lose it. After the gunfight at Blazer's Mill, the Regulators were wounded, leaderless, and hungry for payback. Their boss, John Tunstall, was long in the grave, and the man who'd replaced their fallen leader, Dick Brewer, was a jittery fellow named Jim French, quick with a gun, slow with a plan. Meanwhile, over in the house, the Murphy-Dolan faction, the old guard merchants, corrupt officials and hired killers, were tightening their grip. They had the U.S. Army's sympathy, Sheriff George Peppin on their payroll, and enough whiskey to fuel an army of trigger fingers. Lincoln wasn't much more than one crooked street with maybe 30 buildings, general store, hotel, post office, a few saloons, and the McSween house, which doubled as a home, law office, and fortress. That adobe house would soon become the Alamo of the Lincoln County War. July 15, 1878. It begins. At dawn, the Regulators rode into town. Billy the Kid, Tom O'Folliard, Doc Scurlock, Jim French, Sam Smith, and about a dozen more. They bunkered down in the McSween house, stocked with rifles, ammunition, and whatever food hadn't already been eaten by rats. Sheriff Peppin quickly gathered his own army. 40-plus gunmen, including soldiers from Fort Stanton, and killers like Dutch Charlie Kruling and Bob Beckwith. They surrounded the McSween property and opened fire. Bullets hissed through the air, adobe walls chipped away, and townsfolk dove into cellars praying the fight would skip their house. The first day ended in smoke and curses. Nobody quite sure who'd been hit, but everyone sure they hated everyone else. July 16, 18. The Siege. For 3 straight days, Lincoln was hell on earth. The sun baked the adobe until it cracked. The streets filled with the stink of gunpowder and sweat, and the nights were broken by sporadic rifle cracks. Inside the McSween home, the Regulators were trapped. They took turns at the windows, sniping at anything that moved. Billy the Kid was reportedly actually laughing, between reloads, calling out to the shooters outside, "You boys couldn't hit the side of Texas if it was standing still." Outside, Peppin's men tried to burn them out, but the adobe wouldn't catch. So they did the next best thing. They set fire to the Tunstall store, then moved closer and torched the McSween house. Thick smoke filled the rooms, and the Regulators knew it was do or die time. July 19th, fire and blood. By sundown on the 4th day, the McSween house was a furnace. Inside were about a dozen men, including Billy the Kid, McSween himself, and several Regulators. The air was choking, ammunition popping from the heat, the walls glowing red. Alexander McSween, the lawyer, the last civilized man in the war, prayed out loud. He wasn't a gunfighter, and he sure wasn't ready for this.
"Let's make a run for it!"
They kicked open the back door and charged into the night. Gunfire lit up the yard like a 4th of July gone wrong. Billy ducked behind a chicken coop and returned fire, yelling for the others to follow. Some did, some didn't. McSween tried to run but was gunned down by Bob Beckwith, who himself was shot seconds later. When the smoke cleared, 5 men lay dead in the dirt, McSween among them. Billy the Kid and a handful of Regulators slipped out through the darkness and vanished into the hills. The Battle of Lincoln was over. The Murphy-Dolan faction had won the town, though half the buildings were scorched and nobody was left to celebrate. The war that wouldn't end. The Lincoln County War sputtered on for another year or so. Revenge shootings, ambushes, and politics gone sideways. But the big show was over. Billy the Kid's legend, however, was just getting started. He'd survived Blazer's Mill, the Battle of Lincoln, and half a dozen gunfights in between. Newspapers began calling him the young outlaw of the plains. He was charming, reckless, and completely unstoppable. The kind of anti-hero America loves to remember. Sheriff Peppin kept his badge but lost his respect. The Dolan faction faded into legal squabbles. And the New Mexico Territory, well, It just went right on being the same dusty patch of violence and vengeance it had always been. Twisted History Reflections. Here's the part most history books skip, the weird stuff. Locals claim that after the battle, the McSween house glowed faintly at night for years, as if the adobe had soaked up the fire and wasn't done burning. Billy the Kid supposedly carved his initials into a bullet he fired during the siege. That bullet was later found in the ruins and kept as a lucky charm by a rancher who swore it kept coyotes away. Doc Scurlock, years later, became a Sunday school teacher in Texas. Try explaining that on career day. And a few witnesses said, during the worst of the firefight, church bells rang on their own, though Lincoln didn't have a church bell. Maybe it was the echo of all those souls getting tallied. The twisted takeaway. When you strip away the myth, the Lincoln County War wasn't about law or justice. It was about money, pride, and a handful of men too stubborn to quit. But from the ashes came one of America's favorite legends. Billy the Kid rode out of Lincoln a survivor, half hero, half outlaw. And by the time Sheriff Pat Garrett finally caught up with him in 1881, his story had already outgrown the truth. And somewhere out in the hills, if you listen on a still desert night, folks say you can still hear gunfire echoing down the valley. 4 days of smoke and lead that turned a dusty street into history. The last ride of Billy the Kid. Escape from Lincoln, and the night the legend died. They say the West made legends faster than it buried them, and no legend burned brighter, or ended quicker, than that of Billy the Kid, the cocky, gun-twirling outlaw who could shoot straight, laugh in the face of death, and somehow charm half of New Mexico while doing it. By the spring of 1880, the Lincoln County War was mostly over. The Murphy-Dolan faction was broke, the Tunstall loyalists scattered, and the army had moved on to bigger problems. But Billy? He just couldn't hang up his six-gun. He drifted through the Mescalero Hills, the Capitan Mountains, and down toward Fort Sumner, taking odd jobs, rustling a few cattle, and stealing a few hearts. He wasn't rich, but he was famous. And fame, out here, was more dangerous than bullets. The arrest enters Sheriff Pat Garrett, tall, quiet, and steady as an oak post. Garrett had once shared whiskey with Billy. Now he carried a warrant with Billy's name on it. In December 1880, Garrett tracked the kid to Stinking Springs, a lonely rock house northeast of Fort Sumner. It was cold, windy, and silent, until Garrett's posse surrounded the place before dawn. They called out for surrender. Billy shouted back, "Who's out there?" Garrett replied, "It's me, Pat Garrett." Billy's voice came again, half amusement, half disbelief. "Pat, you're not going to shoot your old friend, are you?" Moments later, a man stepped outside for the horses and caught a bullet through the chest. The gunfight that followed was brief. When the sun rose, the kid's gang was captured. Billy surrendered with a smirk, saying, "Guess you boys finally caught me napping." Thanks for watching. Come back soon for more twisted history tales.